But it's always a blessing having you around.
Yes.
And I say senior because I've always known you as a big brother, so
Thank you.
there's a lot we are learning,
Yes.
I think one of the greatest highlights of our friendship or relationship has been the Afram
Oh,
Plains
yes.
project, but we'll get into that
Oh,
some other
yes.
time.
Yes.
And I'm sure others will
Yes. When we start
also.
talking about church violence.
Exactly. Church violence, church hate. I mean, there's a lot. Church manipulation, you know. So, as a master of
Ah,
communication, as a master of communication, how would you describe in very plain terms what communication is?
well, I like the way you said it in simple, plain terms. But communication is a complex phenomenon. And I think that it is with this same idea of simplicity. People have the idea that communication is just a simple activity of sharing ideas, meaning, with others, basically. But it's more complex than it sounds. So, yes, if we want to look at communication, we want to look at a situation where, first and foremost, you share something in common
Okay.
with somebody. And so, based on that commonality, you are able to have meaningful engagement with the person on the foundation of that commonality. So, what am I saying? For example, you can't have any conversation or discussion with anybody until you share similar ideas, common ideas. You cannot have any meaningful interaction with anybody until you share something like a common language. If we weren't all speaking English right now, it would be difficult. We will need a translator. And if we were to use any of those technologies, we may need probably a translator on iPhone or any of the Android phone to help us, because we need to have an overlapping, field of experience. In here, we talk about language. So our language ought to be the same. Our interests ought to be the same. Our goals ought to be the same. To say it's the same is not necessary to say that we are going to have agreement all the time, because we can still be looking at the same coin but be talking from the different side of the coin. It is the same coin, something that is common to us, a coin. But the coin has two sides. Your perspective may be from the other side of the coin. My perspective may be from the other side of the coin, but it is the same coin. And that is why it is not so easy to define communication in the most simplistic ways. But if it is for knowledge sharing, just to make sense of the concept of communication, then yes, it's a process of having to share meaning, ideas, knowledge, interest with another person to the point where you have mutual understanding.
I
Yes.
really like that last bit, to the point where you have mutual
Understanding.
understanding.
Yeah.
How easy is it or how difficult is it for two parties to arrive at that goal where there's mutual
Okay,
understanding?
great. So let's start with the difficulties. So here is the case: you have two individuals. So let's talk about the interpersonal communication that, say, involves two people, maybe a husband and a wife, two colleagues at work, two people in any form of relationship whatsoever. Now, you need to first appreciate the fact that the individuals involved are different people, socialized differently, probably may have different set of values, and they may have different set of ideas, different set of goals, aspirations. And maybe if their ethnicity differs, it means they may be coming from different ethnic backgrounds, which is significant in terms of the making up of these individuals. So beliefs, lifestyles, values, philosophies. So all of these things are composition of one's personality, so to say, and then the definition of one's individuality. Now, in communication, we import all of these variables or the different elements that constitute our personality into the communication process, meaning that it doesn't matter the common topic we discuss. you are always going to filter the things I say to you through your beliefs, your value systems, your lifestyle, your philosophies, how you were socialized by family, some family values you hold on to, some personal interests you hold on to, some past experiences with whatever phenomenon we are discussing. You are bringing all of this. So it realized that sometimes we don't understand why something so simple, something so basic, something so trivial to us, trivia, becomes such a huge case to the point where, for example, marriage couples are divorcing, best friends are separating, business colleagues are moving apart, partners in business are drifting away. What we think is trivial. The point is that the complexity of communication then exposes us to different dimensions of what communication really is all about in the practical sense. Because if you are talking to me about, for example, let's say LGBT in Ghana, our cultural context, is such a topical matter because of the moral stance on such, issues. But do people within the LGBT community, people who identify as gays, lesbians, whatsoever, do they have rights? Do they deserve to live? Are there laws that's supposed to protect their fundamental human right? Should their choices with regard to sexuality be basis for they being criminalized or in any form? A group of advocates may say, no, yes, this is a human right abuse and there is no way they should be punishable. They should be allowed to integrate. On the other hand, you may have a group of people who may be so cultured, whether as Christians or traditional Ghanaians or Africans, who may hold on to certain values of heterogeneity, conceptualizing any form of amorous relationship between the opposite, amorous relations to be something within the context of the opposite sex. So there are things about values, morals that also come into the debate. So the question is, when we talk about LGBT situation, where is the intersection between, let's say, human rights or law and culture and norms? So you say it's not such an easy thing to talk about if the parties involved are coming from two separate points of view with regards to the same issue. But the point I made earlier is that for communication to take place, there should be a common denominator, something in common, because the Latin origin of the word communication is communis, okay, which means, to make common, oneness, commonality. It means that without any sense of oneness or commonality, there can be no meaningful communication.
Yeah. So it comes back to the question
Yes.
I asked earlier, of which I really appreciate how you took us through the various variables and how difficult it is for two parties to attain that.
Yeah.
But when you look at it in terms of possibility, if you were to, loosely ascribe figures to it in percentages, what would you say it is the possibility of oneness in a setting?
Oh, well,
Generally, just an
generally,
overview
the possibility of
of
oneness.
oneness when it comes to communication. So people have that mutual, grounds for which they can both
Well,
agree on a matter.
I will put it at 50-50.
50-50
I'll put it at
chances.
50-50 chances
Mm.
because communication can go west and it can go south.
Okay.
Sometimes we don't necessarily have to agree on that common phenomenon we are looking at, which has brought us together. But we can have middle grounds. Remember, from the Latin origin, communis, to make common. To make common does not necessarily mean to be the same. To make common doesn't mean we should have necessarily the same perspective.
Uniformity.
It means that we have actually agreed to have a certain middle ground, to reach a certain point of compromise. That even though my views are different from your views, because there is something more valuable to us than our views, which is the relationship we share, would rather have a middle ground where I don't go to the extreme with my beliefs. You don't go extreme. We have, like they say commonly, we are agreeing to disagree.
Yeah.
So by the time you hear such an expression, it means that whatever disagreement it is shouldn't lead to conflict and division. It should rather be basis for learning and continuous learning and exploration of each other's perspective. I think sometimes the dangers in terms of the possibilities is the fact that when we assume certain perspectives and we believe it should be the absolute perspective, that is where the challenge is. Because one of the qualities of communication is that communication is affective. It's an emotional activity. It's an emotional, human experience. Anytime you are talking, your emotions are involved. If someone should make you feel like your ideas are inferior or they are not necessary or they don't belong, you are going to have a certain emotional experience, whether anger, a sense of inferiority, or total disconnection. If you feel unwanted, you become dissatisfied. You get my point?
Yeah.
So in that frame, we should now be more charitable to understand that the fact that the idea of communication is about commonality. Commonality is not necessarily as sameness or uniformity. It is rather an expression of appreciation for diversity. That we should appreciate diverse opinions, diverse perspectives. In fact, we should rather look at diverse perspective as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to explore, as an opportunity to even question our own perspectives.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you this guy understands what he's talking about, it's an understatement. When it comes to communication, he's always one of the very few people I look forward to speak with. Now, you mentioned something very important, the variable of relationship. I'm not sure if our books or the textbooks talk about that. What I remember, or the least a lot of people know about, is always the message, the messenger, the and feedback and all that. Is there a component of relationship that is so valuable in what we read?
Great. So normally, if you get into the books and you want to be academic about communication, there are very identifiable variables you are going to see across. Yes, and there should be a sender, receiver, those of students of community who know the SMCR, model, the Shannon Weaver models, and all the other models you can think of, the linear communication. There are always these variables you see, of course, feedback is there. You have noises in there. You have context. And that is one important thing I think our discussion may have to get to. Context in communication. And then, of course, you have the receiver. Now, the point is this. We have treated communication like a product. We've treated communication like a product. What we often do not realize is that communication is a process. Now, I like your question. I like it because even in terms of the academic definitions of communication, the basic things you are likely to see, yes, they may mention that communication is a process of maybe sending a message or it's a process of dissemination of information from a sender to a receiver. These are like the basic layman definition. But the question is, why so much emphasis on information? It's true. Without information, without the message, there is no messenger. There's nothing to talk about. But is communication defined limitedly by information? Can communication, or is communication beyond information? So here is the point. You have a message to share. One of the things you should be questioning yourself about anytime you have a message to share, first and foremost, how does this message affect whoever is supposed to receive? Now, the idea of receiver, sender, even should tell you a certain old notion about what communication is. That someone is in control of a certain info. The person gives out info to somebody who is to receive it. And the receiver is not called a sender, but a receiver. It means that every feedback the receiver is supposed to give was reaction is actually towards what the sender had offered. As if the receiver lacks agency, lacks a mind of of his own or her own, cannot contribute their unique ideas or subjective views. It's as if they are only doing the biddings of the sender. Now that is an issue in interpersonal communication. However, that idea is also very effective in different aspects of communication activities. For example, such as communicating during emergency situations. During emergency situations, COVID-19, for example, this is not the time gathering people and asking their opinions about how to deal with COVID. The government of the day have to issue out protocols you have to follow. But then after managing the spread or the intensity of the pandemic within Ghana, now they have to look for preventive measures. That was when the government now switched and decided to be more interpersonal. Now started community engagement, other stakeholder engagement, both at the grassroots level and at the higher level, because now you need everybody to buy into the idea that this is about us. If we don't get involved and we leave it with government, the pandemic will never go away. So you have chiefs, you have parents, you have opinion leaders who came on board trying to do their best at the grassroots to get the locals to at least adhere to some of the, for example, hygiene prescriptions, social distancing, wearing of, surgical mask, and so on and so forth. So we can see that sometimes the sender-receiver idea works, but in certain situations, because one of the derivatives which communication emerged from is communicare, which is a verb, a Latin verb that has to do with to share or to exchange. Now, if you look at it, the noun communis is to make one. Communicare is to share. So when it comes to the action part, the whole idea of practicing communication is more about sharing. And what does sharing means? It means that the other party can take a certain portion. And since it's an interaction, you must also have a portion that you are taking from the other party. Now, having said all of these things, our major challenge, why sometimes we have our communication challenges, the way we receive them, is because we prioritize the information we share over the relationships. Because the relationship provides a context. You don't talk to everybody the same way.
Exactly.
You don't talk to people who are above you as if you are talking with your colleagues.
Exactly.
And when you start talking to your colleagues as if you are above them, they see you as somebody who is arrogant because you share a certain common vibe. As colleagues, you are friends. So since when did you start raising your shoulders, controlling us, dishing out instructions? So they find you weird because we are the same. And we should flow as like friends. Why are you becoming like our boss? But if they are dealing with their bosses,
it's a different thing.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much for that perspective. Still in line, or still, still on the issue of relationships and how, context matters and how it could be treated differently and all. Could you speak again about non-verbal communication and how it plays out here?
Yes.
I remember at the conference we had last year, Serene Couples, you spoke about non-verbal communication and how that plays out in marriage and all that. But just with the examples you've given, like with your colleagues and all, non-verbal communication, we have situations where, one party or one person may not necessarily say anything. You may not speak, but your mere silence and, I mean, it plays out in some way. The next thing you know, they say you are either in Ghana, what we say is you are too known. We hear that term all the. How does that play out also?
So it's
non-verbal communication.
So it still comes back to the same idea of trying to look at the different aspects of communication. So before I get that, what we commonly know about communication is central to definition is the fact that it's a message being passed on from A to B. But communication is a process. And that is very important. If we have time to go into that, you will see that it could take us a whole day talking about communication as a process. Yes, because all the elements we mentioned, the variable, the sender, receiver, on their own as isolated variables cannot bring about any communication. There must be a relationship among the variables to kickstart the activity of communication. That relationship begins with a process. See, so communication is about process. Communication beyond information is also a behavior. Okay, yes, some people don't like talking on phones, like phone calls. They prefer WhatsApp messages. So if you call them, you are not going to get them. But immediately you send them a message, they are going to respond. It's a behavior they have cultivated. So we need to keep that at the back of our mind. If we are conscious of things like this, most of the things that get us very offended, we realize that they are not even issues we should bother about. Communication is also gendered. Men and women do not process information the same, because men and women are different in terms of their gender roles. What society?
Could you just hold in a second there? About the difference between men and women, is it just because of what culture has imputed on them,
Exactly.
or it's more biological in their thinking and how
Right.
they process things?
Great. So still holding on to the idea of the non-verbal cues in
Yes,
communication.
yes.
Many people confuse the term sex
With gender.
with gender.
Thank
Yes.
you very much.
So
yes.
sex is a biological identification based on someone being a male or being a female. So yes, it can help us to categorize different groups of people and then identify them according to their sexes or their body frame or biological frame. So while sex is biological, on the other hand, while sex is biological, gender is sociological.
Social construct, eh?
Yes, sociological. It is determined by society. And that is why we have so much challenge with LGBT, transgender, because anything that is defined and determined by society can change. So changing one sex organ to become another is biological, is not social. That is why it is controversial around that area. However, there are those who also believe that women or men can have role-playing experiences. A woman can play the role of a man can play the role of a woman. Why? Because gender, which has to do with the social ascription of roles to a man or a woman based on their femininity or masculinity, can change. It's dynamic over a period of time. Society can decide that, okay, we don't view the roles of men as providers and protectors of families anymore. We think that role is rather for women. Men are actually now going to be seen as performers of the nurturer's caregiver role.
So it means not everything society defines may be true.
Oh, yes. So everything society defines may be unique to that society,
but not necessarily true.
It may not necessarily be, I wouldn't say not necessarily true, not necessarily universal. Not necessarily universal, because, society construct their own realities. So if you have a certain reality that is massively ascribed to.
Yes. So I get that question. So what I'm asking is,
society can get it wrong.
Yes. So a matter is not true based on what the masses say.
No, not necessarily. Truth is truth. Okay. People can even distort truth. And people can pick a lie and make it truth. But philosophers will argue that truth is truth, lie is a lie, and you cannot turn the other. But since we have something called deception, there is a certain lie that can be made to look like true, and there's a certain truth that can be made to look like a lie. Because, for example, if you tell me that to be a male or to be a female is not an issue of birth or biologic, but it is a matter of personal determination, then that is a bit complex and far-fetched. I would say untrue, because everybody is born either a male or a female. But somebody is also going to ask the question, who ascribed the names male or female? Was it society or not? So what we have come to accept as, I'm a male, you are a female, who gave that ascription? Society did. But we've held on to that reality as social truth over a long, and here I'm playing the devil's advocate.
That's okay.
And my position is clear. I'm not in support of LGBT or I'm not against their lives as human beings, because they
Yeah.
are human beings who deserve to be treated as human beings. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes, but I don't subscribe to their orientation. Not at all.
Hmm.
But I'm just trying to be what someone may say, the devil's advocate, or do I want to be God's advocate? You know?
So you say Thomas advocate.
Oh, Thomas
Thomas's advocate.
Okay,
You
Thomas
know
is
the way
advocate.
Thomas always asks. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So because then being a male, being a female,
Mm.
who ascribed it? Society.
Yeah.
But it was based on certain biological reality
Mm.
that somebody comes with this physical form, have
therefore-
stronger, upper chest, muscles, maybe utilizes more oxygen than a female, so, and comes with a male organ. So this is a male. And that, based on the way they are shaped, is a female. It's a reality that we have accepted. And we have used the names male, or the terms male or female, as symbol. It means that these are symbol or symbolic terms that we all have come to agree to, that when we say a male, it means somebody like this figure who appears like this and should have this set of organs. The other person is a female as a result of the same. So you are right. Society can get it wrong. And that is why you can see that, in fact, across many cultures, when you look at many social intervention programs, let's say in typical rural or high cultured communities, people have held on to certain superstitious beliefs about sources of certain diseases like cholera and so on and so forth. And then people come in, sell some scientific basis for some of these diseases. And the people switch, try it out, and they realize that, okay, it's not actually a curse from the gods, it's actually a case of hygiene.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, there is a reorientation about the matter. So yes, society can get so many things wrong, can twist the truth and make it look like a lie, or probably turn the lie and paint it and make it look like, the truth. In the cases of what? Negative propaganda among so on, so on and so forth. So having said all of these things, you realize that men and women in themselves, because of the role society, has ascribed, they have different burdens. Their thinking and realities and experiences are different. So the same information that is placed on the table for men and women to talk about, the woman is going to process it differently, because the understanding of that issue is going to be interpreted using their own filters as women, based on what they go through, based on other duties. The man is also going to look at that information from the perspective of the man. Now, here is the challenge. Until the man and the woman are able to find a middle ground where their unique perspective can converge, and there can be mutual understanding that this matter we are looking at affect us men differently and also affect women differently. And so when we are coming out with, say, strategies about how to handle this matter, and when they talk about strategy, here's the problem I have with academia. Academia has a way of making certain things look as if they are far-fetched and you can only think about them in the corporate sense or in the job environment. Every family needs a strategy. A strategy is simply a game plan. How you intend to solve a particular issue. What is the plan for it? So families can have a financial plan. It's a strategy. They can have a communication plan. It's a strategy. That when there's a conflict, for example, we wouldn't wait for the next day. We have to make sure that we don't wake up the next day with offense or without resolving whatever conflict. That is a strategy. It may be difficult for somebody who is so angry at the other to sit at the table and say, okay, look, let's talk about this matter because the sun cannot go down on this issue. It's difficult. But at the end of the day, it is a strategy.
It's a strategy.
And it may work for others, whilst for others, it may have to be midnight. So you see, that is the point. So until we begin to appreciate that sense of uniqueness and diversity and have a commonality, and here by achieving commonality, we are trying to make one what in any case wasn't. So like the Bible will say, can two walk together?
Unless they agree.
Unless they agree. Does it mean that by agreeing they have lost their sense of uniqueness and individual? No. They have come to a point of consensus, compromise, because that point of consensus and compromise for the two to be able to go along regardless of their diversities and uniqueness is what the commonality is about. At the point where you can change your ideas and start holding on to my ideas, then that is fine. Then it means that probably if my goal was to change your orientation in the first place, then I have succeeded and I've been effective. But if you hold on to your perspective, it shouldn't divide us. We should be able to still coexist within that same frame.